Buried treasure, secret bases, and government cover-ups. How is this related? Find out on tonight's episode. On January 19, 1959, deep in the middle of Arizona, a vehicle arrives at the front gates of Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Private Robert Jones has an incredible story to tell. Private Jones was a World War II veteran who had served with the 25th Infantry at Fort Huachuca. In June of 1941, him and his friend Private Robert Mays were hiking through the canyons of Fort Huachuca. As they were following the creek near an old spring house, Jones suddenly felt the earth give away beneath his feet and fell down a hole as the cave dropped him some 30 feet down into a darkened room. Surprised but unhurt, he began to investigate the area he'd fallen into. As a dim light shined in from the hole, his eyes focused onto what were dark, heavy, metallic bricks stacked along the wall like cordwood. After a short period of time, Private Mays pulled him from the pit with branches and vines. About an hour later, they returned with rope and a flashlight to investigate further. As he looked around the room, he saw gold bars stacked to the ceiling. He crawled back out, covered the hole with the rock, and marked the spot with initials on a different large nearby rock. Until that day, he kept the location secret from everybody. But not everyone believed him. Colonel Elridge Beacon began an investigation to verify his points and his story. The first person to question was obviously Private Mays, who was with Jones at the time, but unfortunately he was killed during the fighting in Italy, so there was no way to corroborate his side of the story. Next, the colonel did manage to locate Jones's First Sergeant Matt Verbal, who did corroborate many points of his story but didn't have an exact recollection of those events. Later, Jones produced 2 affidavits from former Army friends who said that they were present when Jones talked about finding gold in the canyon. He even said that he broke off a chunk of gold and took it to an assayer in Douglas, who allegedly gave him $890 for it. It's not surprising that the assayer denied the story, as it was illegal for private citizens to own gold. But funny enough, there were vaguely remembered stories of Jones throwing a large and expensive beer party about that time, which would have been impossible on a private salary. The command decided not to pursue any further because initial digging had found nothing. His story couldn't be 100% corroborated, and the main water source for the post was right through that area. The Inspector General had concluded in his report as follows: the intensive effort made to support the statements of Jones have been met with complete failure, and no support has been found. It is in my opinion that in his entire story, Jones is a victim of his own imagination, and that the gold as alleged does not now, nor ever did exist, in the site pointed out by Jones. Now this would normally be the end of his story, but 10 tons of gold valued at $600 million is enough to keep the nation's interest. The initial dig occurred when Jones first arrived. He walked to the spring house and about 100 feet away sat down on a large rock with his initials on it, as he originally said, and said, "This is the spot." Manual digging began to a depth of 6 feet, but it was unable to turn up the rock that he had originally covered the hole with. The next day a bulldozer was brought into the scene and dug a crater from 12 to 15 feet deep. Work ceased that afternoon when it was filling with water. Colonel Brunner, the post commander, instructed them to fill up the hole as it was jeopardizing the water source for the base. And at that time, the gold was never found. Almost a year later, another exploration of the site had begun. A well drilling rig was moved into Huachuca Canyon. As they began digging, it was very difficult as boulders and fieldstone were in the way. As they drilled to about 14 feet deep, something very strange happened. The drill bit fell 5 feet. They were having difficulties drilling any further, as since they had apparently hit the rock shelf. When the experienced drill rig operators were questioned, they revealed they had never seen anything like this before, and it must indicate the presence of a large void. Jones was certain this was the room that he had fell in before. The only solution at this point was to dig with the clamshell down to that depth and see what's under there. The next day, the clam truck began digging. At about 12 feet, water was struck, and the composition of the soil changed from a rubble, earth-filled type to a yellow clay structure, composed primarily of decomposed granite. As water began to fill the hole, they brought in pumps. It turns out that the water was not the groundwater for the base, but a subsurface runoff, which confined itself to a channel along the top of the granite. As digging continued down to the 18 to 20 foot level, it became apparent that the void through which the drill bit had fallen was in fact a water eroded cavity in the decomposed granite. Commanding General, Major General Moorman, examined the site. After discussing it with Jones, he indicated his desire that the excavation be continued to the original named depth of 32 feet, to prove or disprove Jones's story once and for all. With 4 pumps running, approximately 2 weeks later, they were able to reach a depth of 26 feet. Digging any further would be impossible with the clamshell, so they brought in the drill again. The drill dug 8.5 feet deeper below the excavation hole dug by the clamshell. This resulted in actual exploratory drilling depth of approximately 34 feet. Accepting Jones's dimensions and location of the underground room would have carried us at least 3 feet below the ceiling of the alleged room. No cavities, voids of any sort were disclosed in this drilling. As a last resort, they dug 4 holes and filled them with dynamite. The 30 sticks of dynamite only caused more problems than solutions. They were unable to find any sort of void, but instead filled the hole with more water and shattered rubble. At this time, further exploration was uneconomical, and they abandoned the dig. Jones was frustrated, and he swore if only a couple more feet were dug, they'd find the cavity. But the post commander insisted that he fulfilled his part of the bargain by digging at 32 feet, and that Jones agreed that he would fulfill his part of the bargain and leave the post. Now, this is what I find most fascinating. Most people would have given up at this point if they were just making up a story, but Jones insisted that it's true. After 2 years of persistence, Jones was able to start another exploration at the site. Jones and Major General Clifton, one of President Kennedy's military aide, contracted a construction company of Prescott, Arizona, for $10,000 worth of work. Meanwhile, he secured an agreement with the Treasury Department for a 50-50 split. Work began February 12th and lasted until March 15th of 1963 when money ran out. They had no better luck, bringing up only rocks and water. With the well driller and the core driller, they checked at random spots in the surrounding area with no results. 5 years later, a Chicago mining company had their attempt. Little was recorded and nothing was turned up. Again, the Army considered this to be the final search and determined to deny permission for any further digging. A short while later, in 1969, Jones had passed away, his dreams unfulfilled. However, there's still one more and the most comprehensive search yet to be done. In 1975, the Quest Exploration Corporation obtained permission from Washington, D.C. for the 5th search for Jones's gold. This was to be the most comprehensive and scientific treasure hunt ever undertaken at that point in time, ever. Quest's contract with the government called for 2 phases. Phase 1, a 20-day scientific search period, which began on May 16, 1975. The scientific search period was also contracted with Stanford Research Institute that would determine if there was anything there that would justify Phase 2, the actual removal of the treasure. Some of the methods for searching included metal detectors, which actually located a bunch of old water pipes strewn about the area. On top of metal detecting, the area was staked out with grid-shaped pattern. Elevations were measured to the accuracy of 3/8 of an inch. But most importantly, tests were carried out with the resistivity meter, an instrument that took readings every 5 feet down each line of stakes. Computers would then analyze the data and build a 3D picture of everything below the surface of the Earth. Scientists were certain that if a tunnel or treasure chamber existed, it would be shown unmistakably on their charts. Even microgravity meters were brought in to pinpoint the treasure room. It would show less gravity in a certain area if there was an empty chamber below, or increased gravity in a room filled with heavy metals such as gold. Data was sent back to the computers in Stanford. Charts and overlays were made to produce a complete picture of all the underground anomalies. The charts showed what appeared to be an old shaft going down at an angle 38 feet deep into a large chamber-shaped anomaly, 20 feet wide, 8 feet 9 inches high, and nearly 30 feet long. 3-inch core holes were drilled to the heart of the anomalies, and they inserted special probes that would register the presence of any metal within 2.5 feet. Unfortunately, the chamber was filled with silt and dirt and water, which was probably the result from the dynamite that was detonated in 1959 by the Army. And unfortunately, there was no gold found. So they found it. They found the chamber that was described exactly as Jones had described. But here's what's strange. Shortly afterwards, the military sent out a memo saying there would be no further digging in that area. They made the land protected so future generations of post commanders and anyone else would not be able to search it any further. Furthermore, Stanford sent out a letter saying, "We mistakenly did our measurements, there was no chamber, and all of our results were wrong," and they redacted and retracted their additional statement that there was actually any chamber in the first place that was like what Jones had described. So why this sudden change? Why would the government no longer allow any drilling when they finally found the location and the chamber below? So why would Stanford suddenly change all of their findings? They had the only microgravimeter in the entire world, and they were using it in this location. They had 3D maps showing it, but yet all of a sudden, they said they were wrong, their data's wrong. And then the government instantly closed any other future attempts at digging or treasure searching in that area. The reason, I think, is because they're trying to hide a deep underground military base, a DUM. Deep underground military bases, DUMBs, are the most secretive of military bases in the United States, and they do exist. Some have been declassified, others are just rumors of their existence. These bases hide the world's biggest secrets, and definitely America's biggest secrets. Some of those include human experiments, mind control programs, and even extraterrestrial research. Is it possible that Jones had stumbled into a part of a deep underground military base, a collapsed portion of it perhaps, and the government, after Stanford found it, realized that the jig was up and had to cover it up? Unfortunately, we'll never know, as this portion of the base is now off limits, and will forever just be a part of history. Let me know what you think in the comments below if you think that this was a deep underground military base, or if there's even gold in the first place. Until next time, this is Midnight Files.
Little white orbs, I'm not sure if they're balloons. There's hundreds of them. Now there's one flying in between the other two. I'm watching. These are not balloons. These are not balloons, people.
This type of weaponry be tested, perhaps not coincidentally, along the U.S.-Mexico border at the Army's electronic proving ground in Fort Huachuca, Arizona.
The technology necessary to project three-dimensional images to a point in space requires no new breakthroughs in science. Keep in mind that test facilities like Fort Huachuca in Arizona are electrical optical test beds, and part of what they're testing are the effects of these electro-optical devices on a target population.
And the target population may be us.